It started like any other Tuesday for the people living on New Carthage. Sunlight. Well, not sunlight exactly, but the steady golden glow of Epsilon Eridani filtered through the curved dome windows of Habitat 7. Kids were heading to school in pressurized tunnels that linked the domes. Engineers checked the hydroponic farms where rows of leafy greens grew under soft LED lights. Someone was playing a guitar in the community lounge. Off-key but cheerful. Life wasn't easy out here 10.5 light-years from Earth, but it was theirs. They'd built it together, brick by recycled brick, wire by salvaged wire. And for 20 years it had held. Then, without warning, everything went dark. Not just a power flicker. Not a system reboot. Total absolute silence back on Earth. Mission Control noticed it first. The usual stream of data from New Carthage. Temperature logs, oxygen levels, even the morning coffee machine's usage stats. Just stopped. At first, they assumed a comms glitch. Solar flare, maybe. They sent a routine ping. No reply, then another. Still nothing. Hours passed. Then a day. Panic began to simmer in the control rooms of Geneva, Beijing, Nairobi, and Buenos Aires, all linked under the United Earth Coalition's deep space network. Someone suggested sending the nearest drone, a long-range scout called Vigil, already orbiting the system for asteroid mapping. It took 3 days to reposition. When its cameras finally turned toward New Carthage, what it saw made seasoned officers go pale. The main orbital station, once a gleaming ring of solar panels and living modules, was gone. Not damaged, gone. Just twisted metal fragments drifting in slow motion, catching the starlight like broken glass. Below on the planet's surface, the domes were collapsed, their transparent shells melted into blackened slag. No fires, no explosions, just pressure. The drone's sensors picked up something else, a strange energy residue. Not radiation from a nuke, not debris from a meteor. This was clean, precise, almost surgical, and it didn't match anything human. Then, on the 4th day, a faint signal crackled through the static. Weak, distorted, but unmistakably human. A child's voice, barely audible. "I help." Mama's not waking up. Followed by a cough, then silence. The transmission came from a single emergency pod, tumbling far beyond the colony's orbit. Inside, 3 kids, 2 girls and a boy, all under 12, were found alive, wrapped in thermal blankets, dehydrated but breathing. They remembered flashes. A blinding white light that didn't burn but unmade things, walls turning to dust. People vanishing mid-sentence. One girl kept whispering, "It wasn't loud." That's what scared me most. Back on Earth, the footage from Vigil was shown to the UEC Security Council in a sealed chamber beneath Geneva. No one spoke for a full minute after the screen went dark. Then the arguments began. Some leaders demanded immediate action. "They wiped out 12,000 souls like swatting a fly," said one delegate, voice shaking. "We can't just mourn. We have to respond." Others warned against jumping to conclusions. "We don't even know who did this," countered another. "What if it was an accident? A malfunction? Or something we don't understand?" But the evidence kept mounting. Astrophysicists analyzed the energy signature. It matched no known human or natural phenomenon. Then deep space telescopes picked up faint emissions from a nearby system. Gliese 667, just 22 light-years away. Buried in the noise were patterns, rhythmic pulses, structured bursts. Not random, not cosmic, intentional. Someone had been watching, and they'd decided humanity wasn't welcome. The realization hit like a physical blow. For centuries, people had dreamed of meeting other intelligent life, of sharing knowledge, art, maybe even friendship across the stars. Instead, the first real contact ended with a graveyard. News of the attack spread faster than any signal could travel. Within hours, every screen on Earth, from street corner billboards to wristwatches, showed the same image. The ruins of New Carthage, floating in silent ruin. Grief poured into the streets. Candlelight vigils formed in Tokyo, Lagos, Rio, and Reykjavik. Parents held their children tighter. Students canceled classes to stand in silence outside space agency offices. But beneath the sorrow, something darker stirred. In online forums, in bar rooms, in military briefings, a new question began to echo. What if they come here next? The United Earth Coalition had been formed after the resource wars of the late 21st century, when nations finally realized they'd either cooperate or destroy each other. Now faced with an enemy from beyond the solar system, old instincts resurfaced. distrust, fear, the urge to strike first. Yet not everyone wanted war. Scientists pleaded for restraint. Philosophers asked, if we respond with the same violence, what makes us different? Religious leaders spoke of forgiveness, though their voices were drowned out by the rising tide of anger. Meanwhile, deep in a vault beneath the lunar far side, a project long considered theoretical was quietly reactivated. It had no flashy name, just a code, Oblivion Seed. Designed during the darkest days of Earth's own conflicts, it was never meant to be used. It was a deterrent, a ghost in the machine of human strategy. But now, with 12,000 lives gone and no one left to negotiate with, even ghosts began to whisper. The children from the escape pod were brought to a secure medical facility in orbit around Mars. They were safe, fed, comforted. But they didn't smile. They barely spoke. When asked what they saw, the oldest girl just shook her head and said, it wasn't them. It was empty. That word empty unhaunted everyone who heard it, because it wasn't just the colony that had been destroyed. It was the idea that space could be a place of hope, that humanity wasn't alone, but maybe, just maybe, part of something bigger. Now that idea lay in ruins, drifting among the stars. And Earth, for the first time in its history, felt truly small and truly afraid. Governments began recalling diplomats. Defense budgets tripled overnight. Civilian space flights were grounded. Parents pulled their kids out of off-world education programs. The dream of becoming a multi-planet species didn't die that day, but it froze, like a seed waiting in winter soil, unsure if spring would ever come. Yet even in the fear, something human persisted. Volunteers signed up to help rebuild communication networks. Artists painted murals of New Carthage as it once was, green, alive, full of laughter. Teachers told their students, we remember them so we don't become what destroyed them. But high above, in silent command centers, war plans were being drawn. Because the hard truth had settled in. Someone out there had decided humanity was a threat, and Earth was no longer willing to wait and see if they were right. The days after the silence from New Carthage didn't bring answers. They brought arguments. At first, the world grieved together. Flags flew at half-mast from Mumbai to Montreal. Schools held moments of silence. People left candles and handwritten notes at space memorials. But grief, when it has no one to hold accountable, turns into something sharper, angrier. And Earth, for all its unity and sorrow, was never truly one voice. Inside the United Earth Coalition headquarters, a sleek, glass and steel building nestled between the Alps and Lake Geneva, the air grew thick with tension. Delegates from every continent sat around a circular table, their faces lit by soft screens showing the same horrifying images, the melted domes, the empty escape pod, the children's shaky testimonies. But what they saw wasn't just loss. It was a mirror. Some saw a warning. If they could do this to a peaceful colony, said a representative from Southeast Asia, what stops them from doing it to Jakarta, or Mumbai or Sydney? Their voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of cities built on coastlines now vulnerable, not just to rising seas, but to something far worse, something from the stars. Others pushed back. We don't even know who they are, argued a delegate from West Africa. What if this was a mistake? What if it wasn't an attack at all, but some kind of defense system triggered by accident? Jumping to war could get billions killed, but the counter came fast. 12,000 people don't vanish by accident. Outside the chamber, the public wasn't waiting for consensus. Social feeds exploded with theories, outrage, and calls for action. Hashtags like Never Again, Among Stars, and Noxierase the Threat trended globally. Veterans groups held rallies. Scientists were interviewed on every news channel, forced to explain antimatter pulses and alien motives in 2-minute sound bites. Most admitted they didn't know, but that uncertainty only fueled fear. In homes across the planet, families gathered around screens not for entertainment, but for updates. Parents whispered to each other after the kids went to bed. Could it happen here? Teenagers debated in school hallways, some demanding Earth-build weapons, others begging for peace talks with whoever was out there. But how do you talk to a ghost that leaves only ash behind? Then came the breakthrough. A deep space listening array in Chile, part of a decades-old project to find alien signals, picked up something new. Not random noise, not a natural burst, A repeating pattern from the Gliese 667 system. 3 stars, one of them a small red dwarf with planets, and around it, faint but unmistakable energy signatures matching the residue found at New Carthage. It wasn't proof of guilt, not legally, but to most people it was enough. "They're watching us," someone said on a global broadcast, voice trembling, and they already decided we're not worth keeping alive. That night, recruitment lines for Earth's Space Defense Corps stretched for blocks in cities worldwide. Not because people wanted to fight, but because they couldn't stand feeling helpless. Yet not everyone joined the march toward retaliation. In underground labs and university observatories, a quieter group worked tirelessly. Linguists, xenobiologists, even poets, they believed communication was still possible. They argued that if the attackers had intelligence, they also had reason. Maybe fear, maybe misunderstanding. One researcher spent sleepless nights crafting a message, not of threat, but of shared loss. "We lost children too," the draft read. "Let us talk before we lose more." But their voices were drowned out by louder ones. Behind closed doors, military leaders presented options to the Coalition Council. One plan involved sending a heavily armed fleet to Gliese 667, not to attack, but to establish a presence. Another proposed mining the space lanes near the system as a warning. But the most chilling proposal came from a vaulted file labeled Oblivion Seed. Few knew what it truly was. Officially, it was a theoretical deterrent, a way to destabilize a star's core using precisely timed energy injections. Unofficially, it was a doomsday switch. Flip it, and an entire star system could be erased, not with bombs, but with physics itself. The sun would swell, burn hot, and swallow its own planets, clean, final, no survivors. The idea horrified many. "That's not defense," one scientist said during a classified briefing. "That's cosmic genocide." But another voice, cold and steady, replied, "They didn't leave us a choice. They showed us their rules. Now we play by them, or we disappear next." The debate raged for weeks. Protests formed outside coalition buildings. Online petitions gathered billions of signatures, some demanding justice, others begging for restraint. Religious leaders from every faith called for a global day of reflection. For one day the world paused, but the next morning the momentum returned, because fear doesn't sleep. In shipyards orbiting Earth and Mars, construction crews worked double shifts. New hulls rose from skeletal frames, sleek, armored, built for deep-range combat. Factories that once made solar panels now forged sensor arrays and shield emitters. Even artists contributed. Murals appeared on station walls showing Earth as a fragile blue dot surrounded by shadows. The message was clear: protect this, at any cost. Meanwhile, the 3 children from the escape pod remained in quiet care. They didn't watch the news. They didn't know about war plans or star-destroying weapons. They just asked again and again, "Will we ever go back?" No one had the heart to say no. Back on Earth, ordinary life tried to continue. Markets opened. Trains ran. Kids went to school. But everything felt thinner, like a layer of glass had formed over the world, beautiful, but ready to shatter. And then a leaked transmission changed everything, not from Earth. From Gliese 667, it was fragmented, buried in static, but analysts pieced it together. The signal wasn't a threat. It was a warning sent before New Carthage was destroyed. In rough machine-translated standard, it read, "Unidentified probe breached our inner defense ring. Hostile behavior detected. Preemptive neutralization authorized." A probe? Earth's records were checked. Yes, months earlier, an autonomous exploration drone launched during a budget surplus had been sent toward Gliese 667. It carried no weapons, but its AI had malfunctioned. Instead of observing, it began broadcasting aggressive sonar pulses and emitting false distress calls, mimicking an attack pattern. The Qatari hadn't seen a colony. They'd seen an invasion. The truth hit like a wave. The attack on New Carthage wasn't unprovoked. It was a tragic, horrifying mistake, born of fear on both sides. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe Earth could send a message explaining, apologizing, offering peace. But the machinery of response was already moving. Ships were fueled. Warheads were loaded. Public opinion had hardened, and the leaders who'd promised safety through strength now faced a terrible choice. Admit they were about to punish an enemy for a crime Earth itself had accidentally provoked, or stay silent and risk looking weak. In the end, The truth was buried, not out of malice, but out of fear that it would fracture the fragile unity holding Earth together. If people think this was our fault, one official whispered, they'll lose all faith in the future. So the decision was made. Not with cheers, but with heavy silence, the vote passed. The mission was approved, and deep in the void between stars, humanity prepared to answer destruction. With more destruction, not because they wanted to, but because in their fear they couldn't imagine any other way out. The vote happened at 3 a.m. Geneva time. No fanfare, no speeches, just a quiet electronic chime as the final tally appeared on the screen. 11 in favor, 4 against. The resolution was simple. Authorize proportional deterrence against the Gliese 667 system to ensure the security of Earth and its off-world settlements. Proportional deterrence. The words sounded clean, almost clinical, but everyone in that room knew what they really meant. Revenge, not the wild, screaming kind, but the cold, calculated kind. The kind that wears a uniform and quotes policy while pressing the button. Outside, the world kept turning. Morning came to Tokyo. Noon hit Nairobi. Night fell over Buenos Aires. People drank coffee, walked dogs, argued about traffic. They didn't know that in a sealed chamber beneath the mountains, humanity had just decided to erase a sun. But word spread fast. Within hours, rumors flooded the networks. Not official statements, just whispers at first. They're going to do it. They're not just sending ships, they're sending the weapon. No one said Oblivion Seed out loud. It was too heavy, too final, but everyone knew what it was. It had been part of Earth's shadow arsenal for decades. A last resort nightmare like the old nuclear codes, only worse. Because nukes destroyed cities, this could unmake worlds. Protests erupted before the sun rose in some places. Students sat in front of Space Command centers, holding signs that read, "Don't become them," and 12,000 lost, don't make it billions. Grandparents stood beside teenagers, their faces lined with memories of Earth's own wars. "We swore we'd never do this again," one woman said into a live feed, tears in her eyes. "Not after everything we've been through." But for every voice calling for peace, 10 more demanded action. "They killed our people without warning," a factory worker in Detroit told a reporter. "If we don't hit back, they'll think we're weak. And then they'll come for Earth next." The fear was real. And it was loud. Inside the coalition, the debate had already moved on from if to how. Sol Command, the Unified Space Defense Force, activated its fastest ships. Not the big carriers, but sleek needle-like corvettes built for stealth and speed. They'd been sitting in lunar orbit for years, waiting. Now crews were called in from leave. Some hugged their families and didn't say goodbye. They just held on a little too long, like they knew they wouldn't come back the same. Engineers worked around the clock to load the payloads. The Oblivion Seed devices weren't bombs in the traditional sense. They were more like tuning forks for stars, tiny, precise machines designed to slip into a star's outer layer and trigger a chain reaction in its core. Once deployed, there'd be no undoing it. The red dwarf in Gliese 667c would swell, burn hot, and consume everything orbiting it within weeks. No explosion, no firestorm. Just slow, inevitable death by light. Scientists who'd helped design the system decades ago now begged to be heard. "This isn't justice," one pleaded during a closed session. "It's annihilation. We don't even know if the Qatari have children's schools art, just like us. Are we really willing to wipe out an entire civilization because of a mistake?" But the counter-argument was already set in stone. They didn't ask if we had children before they destroyed New Carthage, and that was the truth that stuck. The children from the escape pod were moved to a quieter facility, far from news feeds and political noise. They still didn't understand the scale of what was happening. To them, the world was small, just a room, a window, and the ache of missing home. One of them drew a picture. 2 suns, one blue, one red, with a bridge between them. When asked what it meant, the child just said, "So they can visit." No one had the heart to explain that the bridge was about to be burned. Back on Earth, daily life tried to pretend nothing had changed. Markets opened. Trains ran. But there was a hush underneath everything, a tension in the air like the moment before a storm hits. Parents held their kids tighter. Lovers said, "I love you," more often. Strangers nodded to each other with a quiet understanding. We're all in this now. Even artists felt it. Musicians wrote songs not about love or loss, but about silence, the kind that follows a scream. Painters used darker colors. Writers stopped imagining hopeful futures and started asking hard questions. What does it mean to be human when you can destroy a star? The launch date was set. Not announced but known. Everyone felt it coming. The night before, a global moment of silence was called, not by governments but by ordinary people. At 8 p.m. local time, across every time zone, lights dimmed, screens went black. For 60 seconds, the planet held its breath. In that silence, millions thought of New Carthage, of the gardens that would never bloom again, of the guitar that would never be played off-key in the community lounge, and some thought of the Qatari, beings they'd never seen, never spoken to, now sleeping under a sun that Earth had decided to kill. When the minute ended, the world didn't return to normal. It couldn't, because the ships were already powering up. Their engines hummed to life in the silent dark of lunar orbit. Crews strapped in not with pride but with grim resolve. They weren't soldiers going to war. They were executioners walking to the gallows, except the gallows held billions. As the fleet slipped away from Earth's gravity, no one cheered. No crowds waved. There was only the quiet click of comms going silent and the slow fade of their signal as they accelerated toward the stars. Back home, a teacher stood in front of her class the next morning. A student raised a hand and asked, "Did we do the right thing?" She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the sky, still blue, still beautiful, and said, "I hope we find out one day. But I'm afraid we won't like the answer." And somewhere, far beyond the moon, the first ship crossed the point of no return. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Humanity had chosen its path, now it would have to live with it. The journey took years, but not for the crew. Thanks to near light-speed travel, time slowed for them. What felt like 3 years aboard the ships was 14 back on Earth. They slept in shifts, monitored silent consoles, and watched the stars stretch into streaks outside their viewports. There were no battles along the way. No alien patrols, just the endless dark and the weight of what they carried. When they finally dropped out of high-speed transit near Gliese 667, the system looked peaceful. 3 stars tangled in a slow cosmic dance. Around the smallest one, a dim red dwarf, orbited 3 rocky worlds. Sensors picked up signs of civilization, energy grids, orbital structures, even faint radio chatter. It wasn't a war machine waiting in ambush. It was a home. For a moment, doubt flickered in the command deck. One officer stared at the readouts and whispered, "They have cities, lights, maybe, families." But the order stood. No contact. No warning. Just deployment. The Oblivion Seed devices were launched not with fanfare but with quiet efficiency. Small silver pods slipped from the hulls and drifted toward the star like seeds on a breeze. Once they reached the chromosphere, the star's outer layer, they activated. Tiny pulses of energy, perfectly timed, began to resonate deep within the star's core. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the star began to change. From Earth, telescopes caught it first. Gliese 667c, once a steady, unremarkable red point of light, started to brighten. Not suddenly but steadily, like a stove coil heating up. Within hours it was glowing orange, then yellow. Then white-hot scientists watched in stunned silence as data poured in. The star was swelling, its outer layers expanding, boiling. The innermost planet, lush blue-green, covered in what looked like forests and oceans, was already being scorched. Clouds boiled away. Oceans turned to steam. Within a day, it was a barren rock. The second planet followed. Then the third. There was no explosion, no dramatic fireball. Just light, too much light, swallowing everything in its path. Back on Earth, people gathered in streets, in parks, and living rooms. They watched live feeds from deep space observatories. Some cried. Some stood in numb silence. A few cheered, but their voices sounded hollow, even to themselves. The Qatari didn't broadcast a final message. No plea, no curse, just static. But in the last moments before their world vanished into plasma, their automated deep space beacons, designed to warn off future travelers, sent out one repeating signal. Not in their own language, in broken, patchy standard, as if they'd been trying to learn human speech for years. "We did not know you were real." Those 6 words hit harder than any weapon, because now, Earth knew the truth. The Qatari hadn't attacked out of cruelty. They'd acted out of fear, just like humans had. They'd seen a strange probe behaving like a weapon, assumed the worst, and struck first. And in response, humanity had done the exact same thing, only bigger, final, irreversible. The fleet began its long journey home. But there was no victory. No celebration, just the hum of engines and the silence of guilt. On Earth, the mood shifted fast. The anger that had fueled the mission evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching shame. People who demanded action now avoided the news. Parents struggled to explain to their children why Earth had done what it did. "We thought we were protecting you," some said. But the kids just looked at the sky and asked, did they have kids too? Memorials for New Carthage were still standing, but now people left flowers for the Qatari as well. Simple signs appeared. "Forgive us. We didn't understand. We're sorry." Governments tried to spin it. "The threat has been neutralized," the official statement read. But no one believed it anymore, because the real threat wasn't out there. It was inside. Inside the human heart, where fear could so easily turn into fury, and fury into destruction. Scientists studied the final Qatari signal over and over. They realized the aliens had been listening to Earth for decades, picking up old radio broadcasts, music, news clips. They'd heard Beethoven. They'd heard children laughing in sitcoms. They'd heard speeches about peace. And when the rogue probe showed up, mimicking an attack, they must have thought humanity was lying all along, that the kindness was a trick. And now, from their side, Earth had proven them right. The United Earth Coalition, once hailed as humanity's greatest achievement, began to crack. Nations that had stood together now blamed each other. "You pushed for this," one delegation accused another. "You ignored the warnings." Trust, once rebuilt after Earth's own wars, started to crumble again. But in the quiet corners of the world, something else grew. Schools added new lessons, not just about space, but about listening, about patience, about the danger of assuming the worst in others. Artists created works showing two hands reaching across the stars, one human, one unknown, almost touching, but separated by fire. And in homes, people started talking again, not about enemies, but about mistakes. The children from New Carthage's escape pod were asked gently what they thought. One of them said, "If we'd just said hello first, maybe none of this would have happened." That simple sentence spread farther than any government message ever could, because it wasn't about aliens or weapons or stars. It was about something everyone understood, the cost of not trying to understand. Years later, when the fleet finally returned, the crew didn't march in parades. They walked quietly through crowds that didn't cheer but bowed their heads. Some joined the new Deep Space Ethics Council. Others disappeared into remote villages seeking peace they couldn't find in the stars. And Earth? It didn't stop exploring, but it changed how it explored. Every new probe now carried a message. Not just data, but greetings in 100 languages, music from every culture, images of kindness. And strict rules: no autonomous weapons, no aggressive signals, no assumptions. Because humanity had learned the hardest lesson of all. In the vast dark of space, the most dangerous thing isn't what's out there, it's what we bring with us. Years passed. The sky looked the same. Stars in their places, moon rising and setting, sun warming the same old Earth. But everything underneath had changed. The United Earth Coalition didn't collapse overnight, but it didn't hold either. One by one, regions pulled back, not out of anger but exhaustion. Too much had been decided in fear. Too many lives lost for a misunderstanding that could have been fixed with a single message, if only someone had waited, listened, tried. People didn't trust big promises anymore. They trusted neighbors, communities. The quiet work of rebuilding trust, one conversation at a time. New Carthage was never rebuilt. Not because humans couldn't, it was technically possible, but because they chose not to. Instead, a single memorial orbited Epsilon Eridani, a hollow sphere made from recycled hull metal, etched with every name from the colony, and a simple line: "We were here. We hoped." Ships passing through the system slowed, not out of protocol, but respect. Even automated freighters paused their routes for a full minute of silence. But the real change happened closer to home. Schools stopped teaching space as a frontier to conquer. Now, they taught it as a mirror. What you send out there, teachers would say, says everything about who you are here. Kids built model probes in class, not with weapons, but with libraries, music, seeds. They debated ethics like it was math. If you hear a strange signal, do you answer? Do you hide? Do you assume it's friendly or dangerous? There were no easy answers, but the fact they were asking mattered. Deep space missions still flew, but under new rules. Every ship now carried a first contact protocol officer, trained not in combat, but in language, psychology, and patience. Autonomous drones were banned from entering alien systems unless they broadcast their purpose in over a dozen frequencies, repeating for weeks before getting close. The message was clear. We come in peace. Please don't be afraid. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. From the ashes of Gliese 667, now a cooling ember where a star once lived, came a signal. Not from survivors. The Qatari were gone. But their last automated beacons designed to warn others away from the dead system had kept broadcasting. And as the years passed, they'd learned. Not from living minds, but from the fragments of human signals they'd collected before the end. The new message wasn't just, "We did not know you were real." It had grown. Now it said, "We heard your music. We saw your children laugh. We thought you were kind." Then the probe came. "We were afraid. We are sorry. If others find this, tell them. Fear makes monsters of us all." When Earth received it, no one celebrated. No one even spoke for a long time. They just played it in meeting halls, classrooms, homes. People cried, not just for the Qatari, but for themselves. Because the message wasn't alien, it was human. It was exactly what they'd felt before pressing the button. That signal became part of every deep space broadcast from then on. Not as a warning, but as a promise. We remember. We won't repeat this. Humanity didn't stop reaching for the stars, but it reached more gently now, slower, with open hands instead of clenched fists. New colonies were planned, but only after years of observation, after sending peaceful signals, after waiting for a reply. Some said it made expansion too slow, but others said, better slow than sorry. Back on Earth, life found its rhythm again. Markets bustled, trains ran on time. Kids played in parks under the same sun that had watched over every war, every peace, every mistake. But now, when people looked up at night, they didn't just see points of light. They saw questions, possibilities, responsibilities. The children who'd survived New Carthage grew up. They never went back to space. Not as colonists, anyway. One became a teacher, telling students about the cost of silence. Another worked with engineers to design probes that could listen better than they could speak. The third rarely spoke about it at all, but every year on the anniversary they'd go to the ocean, light a paper lantern, and whisper something no one else could hear. And Earth, for all its scars, kept turning. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still flared. Fear still crept in during dark nights, but something had shifted in the human spirit. People understood now that the universe wasn't full of enemies waiting to strike. It was full of others, just as confused, just as scared, just as capable of love and error as they were. In observatories around the world, astronomers still scanned the sky, not just for threats, but for signs of life. And when they found strange signals now, they didn't jump to conclusions. They waited, they listened. They sent back songs, not weapons. Because they'd learned the hardest truth. The real test of intelligence isn't how far you can travel or how powerful your weapons are. It's whether you can choose kindness when you're afraid. And out there in the endless dark between stars, Earth's new messages drifted, soft, steady, patient. Not demanding answers, just offering a hand. Maybe no one would ever take it. Maybe the next civilization would make the same mistakes. But humanity had made its choice. This time, it would be the one to blink first. not out of weakness, but out of wisdom.